everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is Luke with Luke F1 Fantasy. We are back after a 3-week summer break with a double header, the Dutch Grand Prix, followed by the Italian Grand Prix. There is no time like the present to get back into our fantasy teams and figure out what we're going to do to get our teams back in order. So if you are new around here, I make weekly fantasy F1 videos, helping you identify transfer targets, answer difficult team selection headaches, and generally talk about strategy and thoughts. Looking ahead to this weekend, we have the Dutch Grand Prix, we have qualifying this coming Saturday, the 30th of August at 7 a.m. Mountain Time in North America and 2 p.m. UK time, with a race on Sunday, the 31st of August at pretty much the same time. Looking ahead to the weather, it may get a little bit of rain. And when rain is in play in Zandvoort, we have seen great racing to watch. So rain in Zandvoort definitely tends to bring out some excitement. Maybe not so much excitement if we are watching it from an F1 fantasy perspective, but we will be factoring that into some of our strategies as we get closer to the deadline. So where do we left off then? Well, quick rewind back to Hungary. Well, I had the team that didn't make any transfers. I kept Bearman in the team when there was the option to swap in Lawson or Bortoleto, which both would have been better choices from a budget and points perspective. Unfortunately, the DNFs and mechanical issues for Bearman prevented that. We didn't see the price rise we were going for with the Bearman pick. But we have lots of races ahead, some chips to use, some sprint weekends to capitalize on and start climbing back up the leaderboard. But that decision did drop me out of the top 1K. I dropped a couple hundred places to 1050. Budget is still fairly good. It's higher than average, but it's not quite at the top tier level. So I am at this moment in time 0.1 million away from a heavy build with the PS3 Russell, McLaren, Ferrari, with the 3 cheapest assets. Looking at my team, we have key moves to make, and Bearman with that DNF unfortunately now is a for sure 100% transfer out of my team. Looking at the rest of the lineup, I have PS3 and McLaren as untouchables. They are going to be in the team for the foreseeable future. Don't see myself moving off that unless there are some Hail Mary plays later on the season. I have Alonso as a good hold for me. He had a good performance in Hungary, and as we move into the budget builder coming up in a couple of slides, we'll be able to see that he is likely going to be a hold into my team. So that leaves Hülkenberg, Lance Stroll, and Ferrari as potentially assets that we may look to swap out, maybe keep in. Haven't really made up my mind too much, but because of that benefit of rolling a transfer from last week, I am going into the Dutch Grand Prix with 3 transfers. There is a little wiggle room, or I could continue to roll these transfers. I haven't really made up my mind too much on those 3 transfers, Hülkenberg, Stroll, and Ferrari. But keep watching. We'll be following Free Practice 1 and Free Practice 2, awaiting the sims from Ritter in the F1 Fantasy Tools community. And normally I get my final team thought selection out late Friday night, Mountain Time, early Saturday morning, UK time. Don't forget to click the like and subscribe button to get a notification of that, and look for the video later on this week. Alright, so now let's dig into the transfer market. So popping over to the budget builder on F1 Fantasy Tools, we see 2 likely rises this week, Bortoleto and Liam Lawson topping the leaderboard there, with Bortoleto having a -14 to see an increase of 0.6, and Lawson needing to score above -0.2 for a 0.6. So those 2 assets are definitely primed for a price increase. If you've already got them in your team, great. You are well on your way to formulating your team structure around potentially moving into 4A. But if you don't have any of these assets into your lineup, it's certainly worth moving into one, if not both of those, depending on what type of strategy, aggressive, conventional, oppositional to the metas. That is our likely risers. We have Alonso here just below. Alonso is heavily owned in F1 Fantasy, so engaged managers probably have him with 17 points in round 14 in Hungary, when his value is 7.5, he's in good position to look for a price increase this coming week as well. And experience around a track like Zandvoort is definitely useful. So Alonso, with his years of experience, is definitely a stronghold, or if not a transfer in if you don't have him. We have Sainz and Stroll and Hülkenberg sort of forming this next tier of three drivers that could be interesting to pick up. You know, you kind of look at their points to get the 0.2, 4, and 5. Like that's, probably doable on a sort of good to above good type of week for these drivers. The 0.6, 10, 13, 14 drivers like this can reach that on a good weekend. The Kick, the Williams, the Aston has shown that they do have sort of top 8, 10 potential. Hülkenberg sort of also getting his ability from an overtakes perspective. But it may be just a little bit of a tough ask for maybe someone like Hülkenberg, maybe a Stroll. We're going to have to take a look. Sainz at 5.9 million could be set for his first prize rise. So it could be good timing to get onto a team like Williams, who typically do well at a track like this. I don't see much in the bottom half to make us consider assets at their price. Skip over those for now. Into Tier A drivers, Piastri needing to score above 24 for a 0.3. At 25 for Russell, 36, 38 for Leclerc and Norris. Fairly evenly matched in this Tier A department. And unless you're kind of moving towards the Russell build, there's not really much here to get too excited about in your lineups. Going over to our constructors, McLaren still leading the way, must have for our teams. Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, all of them, they're going to score the maximum price increase. This is pretty much, constructors are always getting this now. The game is kind of cracked in this level. So it's really all comes down to points as to who's looking better, who do we feel has got good strategy, good luck going into the weekend for our Tier A's. And then looking into our Tier B's, Kick and Aston leading the way if you're looking for budget building options above -24 for a big increase. Probably everyone down to, V-Carb and even Williams are going to secure a price increase. And this midfield battle is getting kind of spicy. So last time out, we did see a triple McLaren build with pretty much almost the triple Aston build. Definitely did outscore the typical Piastri McLaren Ferrari build. So is a build that I've been kind of pumping up for the last couple of weeks. I actually played it on my Team 3 team, as you can see here, and it turned out to be a really good weekend for that. I played it in Silverstone on my main team. That wasn't the week to do it. It tended to be a week early on a lot of my builds this week that seemed to sort of perform. So we're on the right track. We're making the right decisions. It's just about executing on the right race weekend. There is pause before teams move on to 4A. If this week we don't see the 4A heavy build of Russell get played, there may be an extra week to go against the differential, avoid picking a Ferrari, dropping down to potentially a Tier B constructor. And on weekends where sort of the top two, Mercedes or Ferrari have some troubles, one of these midfield teams, especially the higher ranked midfield teams right now, like an Aston, Williams, potentially throw a Kick in there, they've shown that they can take advantage. So I think this is the last weekend to play the single A-tier premium constructor build before it's not in our best interest from a points perspective. Which way am I leaning for these B-tier options? So really have the list here, and I'm kind of going to talk through some of my sort of main thinking points around them. With Lance Stroll, we have someone who has shown this year that he can be quite useful in the rain. Weekends this year, Australia, Miami sort of come to mind, even Silverstone. Like, he generally, I wouldn't say he is a skilled driver like Max is, like he just comes alive in the rain. I just wonder whether Lance is just experience, just he has a little bit of racing nuance just to not get involved in issues in the rain. Maybe he keeps things error-free and lets the chaos around him happen. You don't see his team really also making that many great. And sometimes I think with Lance Stroll, his qualifying is not as good as Alonso's and other cars around him. Aston can roll the dice on his strategy in the race. And as long as he avoids trouble, doesn't make an error, they maybe pit him in earlier or later. He takes advantage of that. With this weekend being potentially rain affected, it may feel like a luxury to transfer him out. And so there is an argument in a world where I see where I would keep a guy like Lance Stroll. Liam Lawson, certainly from a budget perspective, he does fit the bill. Like has a great chance for a price increase of 0.6. He did score quite decent in Hungary with 10 points, over double his price. So, he is someone that you could keep for a couple of weeks, potentially if he scores up, above sort of 5, 6. But you struggle to see his value long term, especially if you do see him improve this week. He goes up to 5.1 million. He's at risk of losing you budget. If you don't have Lawson in your team, I don't know if he's a full transfer for me. You may want to move him out the next week. But if you have Lawson in your team, I would think the opposite, that I don't think it's worth transferring him out. Depends on where you're at with Liam Lawson. Liam Lawson burned me earlier on this year. And I have a tweet that I put out earlier this year as to what actually happens. If you remember early in the season, Liam Lawson was a massive transfer for the Spanish Grand Prix. Did what he needed to do. He scored 9 points and got a 0.6 million increase, which meant he was a good hold for the next week in Canada. He had a DNF, lost you 20 points, and you also saw a 0.6 million decrease, which meant that you were forced to sell him. So Liam Lawson has this history of coming into your team, doing well, and then the next week, doing worse. If you look at it over 2 weeks, he didn't get you any more budget gain, and you were down 11 points. So him having had that in the past makes me think that because I don't have Lawson, if I see everyone else moving towards Lawson, perhaps the play is to not move to Lawson. It may not happen. He may be a great buy this week. But if there are little differentials to be had, for me as a non-Lawson owner, I'd probably choose to put in Bortoleto. He has the much safer floor of getting me a points increase. So that's my thoughts on Liam Lawson. Alonso, I am strongly moving towards keeping it in my team. Aston, I think there's some good vibes around Aston since Adrian Newey has made himself more visible around the paddock. The Aston car seems to have been improving. Silverstone's really the one blip in their last few races. They didn't perform the way they should have. But 45 points out last time, they led the B tier constructors in points. And even like last week with their 45, even ended up scoring more than Ferrari and Red Bull. They were the third highest scorer last week. So Aston, there's some good vibes around it. And they're one of the teams that's still making constant improvements for next year. They'll probably have a lot of expectations for next year. So as we look at teams that are going to be sort of continuing to improve towards this back end of the season, Aston are in my thoughts. And I want to talk about Carlos Sainz. He has seen a constant decrease in price all season. And avoided DNFs in the last few weeks, which has stopped the leakiness of his value. But at 5.9 million in a Williams car that can jump into the top 6, he is starting to look more attractive. Budget-wise, still, scoring less than 3 points, you're going to lose 0.2. But Williams have said, and there are some quotes from James Vowles in the summer break, that Williams tends to do well at the next couple tracks, which is Zandvoort and Monza. And a team that's already sort of starting to look towards 2026 and look towards their development. So here's a little table on the B tier constructors right now. Williams has an 18-point lead over Aston. Aston very much close to the kick, and a little bit of a tear down to the Racing Bulls has an Alpine. This is reflective of how the teams have done this year. Longevity shows that Williams have been the strongest over the first half of the season. Aston have been closing that gap into the second half of the first half. When we're looking at B tier assets, I think it is important to sort of see where teams are at and what they're fighting for. And my prediction is we maybe start to see, Racing Bulls and Alpine just sort of start to especially Alpine, Colapinto, while he's a 4.5 million asset, I just think there's just so many bad vibes around the Alpine that I don't want him in my team even at a 4.5 million. Haas is not too bad. It's just the problem is their drivers tend to be a little bit more pricier due to their good performances in the early part of the season. Racing Bulls, they can kind of sometimes show up, sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's difficult to predict who out of Hadjar and Lawson is going to do well that week. But yeah, so is Williams, Aston, Kick, is this kind of where we want to keep our B tier stocks in the most? I would say that's going forward probably the strategy. So Sainz, maybe someone that I look into my team this week if I do think that he has the potential to outscore sort of a Stroll or Hülkenberg, even a Lawson to a degree, that I may run the risk of him scoring less than 4 and may see a 0.2. As long as he doesn't DNF and gets around that point, he would be someone that I'd be looking at keeping for a couple of weeks just to get that budget back. Similar to the Lawson situation, I may lose 0.2 on Sainz this week, but if Williams continue to look good and have a good strong performance and they may look good in Monza too, then he could be a strong hold or a strong transfer in. It may be one of those things to get into an asset earlier than everyone else does, just the same way how the Lawson pick worked last time in Hungary. And then Nico Hülkenberg at 9.6 million, 14 points out in Hungary. So we may be at the peak of Hülkenberg's value and what he can kind of give us from our points things. So again, it could be one of those situations where getting off Hülkenberg a week earlier than the field is one of those differentials to be looked at. From my first team selection, I've started the week with one transfer. That's simply Bearman Bortoleto. Bortoleto clearly has better chances over Liam Lawson. I like the Kick more than the Racing Bull. And Bortoleto has been on a good run of form. So hopefully he can kind of continue that form out of the summer break, and hoping that that summer break hasn't put any sort of brakes onto his development and improvement. So Bortoleto is a really strong asset for me to bring into the team. After that, it really is going to come down to free practice and hearing what teams are saying, hearing what, the comfort levels. So I am certainly approaching it this weekend from a situation where I'd be putting Stroll over Sainz and Sainz over Nico Hülkenberg. And that means that I'm thinking of putting Sainz in as my second transfer in over Nico Hülkenberg. This may be my Williams favoritism coming out a little bit to see Sainz in my team, but I do think that time is coming and he'll be a popular transfer in a couple of weeks. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing if Williams do look strong this current weekend. But I am really considering not going with Liam Lawson and not even looking at the free practice results to consider it. I'm really conscious of being 100 off, 120 or 150 points off top spot right now. 10 races left, trying to make up 10 to 15 points each week, try to get an average, start looking at different differentials to move off. Another differential to consider would be moving off Ferrari to Mercedes. This move would free up some moves if you wanted to go into a 4A build with a Russell. Moving down to Mercedes, this I believe does free up some funds and able to avoid some better priced B tier constructors. And with the race, that's going to be probably cooler, a little bit more chaosy, a little bit one where strategy tends to evolve. And we all know how great Ferrari are with their strategy calls. That maybe even looking at a Mercedes differential, something to look at this week. The issue I have is the rookie nature with Kimi Antonelli. It seems to sort of plateaued a little bit with his development this year. I wonder whether the rigors of a full professional F1 season with the travel, with all that comes with it, is starting to take a toll on someone like Kimi, and what does that look like for the rest of the season? Something to also kind of keep in mind is George Russell's contract situation hasn't been sorted out at Mercedes yet. Like, is that, Max is committed to Red Bull for another year. It doesn't make sense why Mercedes would get rid of Russell, because where would he go? But that's just something to think about. Like, that's clearly going to be playing on his mind a little bit. He talks about it in press conferences, how he's just focused on driving and his results will sort the contract out. But I mean, he's been having some good results this year and his contract hasn't sorted out. So I'm not saying he's going to leave Mercedes, just something to consider which may affect his mindset. So chip strategies, non-sprint weekend, so I wouldn't be looking at any chips such as 3X or Autopilot at this point. Autopilot we want to save for when we get into the 4A lineups or the 2 premium driver lineups. If you do have no negative left, keep that warm and ready, maybe activate that depending on the weather this weekend, and if things look a little bit interesting, maybe consider using no negative this weekend if you still have that. So that wraps it up for the first look ahead of Zandvoort. I'll be back after free practice 2 with my final thoughts and updated team selections. So stay tuned for that. Let me know in the comments what your strategy and main team decisions are for this week. And like and subscribe for more F1 fantasy content. We'll see you after free practice and catch you on the next one.